Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato.
Rhett Scholl.
Dave Honorato.
Today we're going to talk about finding your own sound or finding your sound. And this involves pairing guitars. We're going to talk about guitars. We're not going to talk about your piano sound. This involves your guitar and amp combination.
Instantly, about half the audience just clicked away.
Okay. We'll talk about pianos. We'll talk about Faziolis and Steinways and Bosendorfers and Schimmels and Yamahas. Too.
Speaking of guitars, don't forget, if you're going to be at NAMM Friday, the three of us, the Three Amigos, are going to be at the Gibson booth doing this very thing.
Yeah.
Not the exact thing that we're doing.
Well, we're going to memorize
we're in Atlanta
this
right now.
transcript, and then we're going to just redo it. Yeah. No, we'll do like a Q&A. We've got a topic picked. It's going to be really cool.
Yeah, so come down. It'd be great to meet you guys in person.
Yeah.
And just save all your equipment questions for Dave and just stand in line when it's over and you can ask
Actually,
him.
better yet, just bring your guitar that you need to get set up.
You know what? Totally, man.
Dave will have all his gear. He'll have his little
man, I'll set
bag.
guitars up right
for free, too. He'll do it
totally
for free.
Yeah,
it's a NAMM
So I'll pay you. I'll pay you to bring your guitar to me, yes.
Okay, so a lot of... We all go through these things. You know, what kind of pickups we want to have. Do we want PAFs? Do we want P90s? Do we want single coil sound? And then we also go through what kind of amps do we want to play through? Do we want a Fender sound with with 6V6s or 6L6s, or do we want a Marshall sound? But the Marshall sound could have EL34s or 5881s or KT66s or KT
77s,
77s, 88s.
Yeah.
There's many different Marshall tube combinations. Do you want to have a Vogt sound? That has a completely different variation in sound. And what kind of instruments go with these things? What are good pairings to have? A lot of this is obviously personal taste. You know, when I think of a Fender, like a Fender Deluxe or something, I think of something that has a very different mid-range than a Marshall does. And if I'm going to play heavier rock, I'm probably not going to play through a Fender Deluxe because you're not going to get the same unless I want a more scoop sound. But if all you have is a Fender Deluxe, well, maybe you use a certain type of distortion pedal with it that actually does accentuate the mid-range. Maybe not a big muff, which is kind of has more of a scoop mid-range, but maybe something else like a...
I mean, there's tons of amp in a box pedals. Actually, you changed shirts. Well, in the last video, you were wearing a Lawrence Petros shirt.
Oh, yeah.
And Lawrence makes a really cool pedal called the 68 Drive, which is that it's basically a 68 plexi in a box kind of thing, and you could put that in front of a Fender amp, a clean amp, and essentially turn that into a Marshall. Yeah. And that's a really good place, I think, for people to start, for guitar players to start on their sort of tonal journeys. If you don't have a clear picture of where you want to be and what your sound is, I think it makes sense to try and get your hands on a clean pedal platform amp and start collecting and rotating some good sort of character pedals in and out. I mean,
although I don't totally agree with that, because to me, a Fender sound doesn't. You're already starting with a deficiency in the mids to a certain degree, and so your Marshall amp in a box is not going to have the same qualities as maybe a distortion pedal or some type of overdrive that you actually have a lot of tonal variation on.
Yeah, well, this is how I started. My first amp that I started gigging with for years was a Port City Pearl. And if anybody knows that amp, it is 50 watts or even 100 watts, 6L6, completely clean, very little tonal characteristics at all. I mean, in some cases, it's almost just like a PA amp.
Yeah,
tube-driven PA.
It's very transparent.
And that's the whole idea, is that it's used, so you could take something like the Revival Drive, which was just sitting here, I don't know where it went, but like a pedal like the Revival Drive is a great example of that, where it was designed essentially to be like the preamp section of a Fender amp and a Marshall amp that you could dial in and put in front of a really clean, transparent pedal platform amp. Yeah. And that gives you the ability to at least get in the ballpark of something like a Marshall or a Vox or something like that. And then for me, what happened was I found myself gravitating more towards the EL84 amp sounds, the EF86 amp, the AC30 type sound. And so my next amp was a Morgan AC20, and I did that for years, and then went back to the Fender thing with a divided by 13, and now I'm moving into the Marshall. But it started for me with sort of the blank canvas amp that I could sort of plug different tones into and see how they worked.
Yeah. I'd say for me, or my suggestion of that is finding your sound is first find out what equipment the bands that you like, what they use, and what tones on what records and songs that you really gravitate toward and go, I really like that. Find out what they're using. Find out what the rig is. I mean, it's pretty easy to find it out now. And so, and if you're on a budget and you go, well, I can't afford to buy an AC30 and I can't afford to buy, find out what's the equivalent in a lower price amp that's sort of set up similarly. Like, AC30s are all EL84s. So you could buy like a Blues Junior for $500, $600, and it's very close in tone to an AC30 as far as the tube layout and the way the preamp is laid out. So you get that sparkly high end and kind of thing. So it's in obviously with an amp, a smaller amp like that, and you can use pedals to color it and do everything. But I would suggest, find out what the bands or the players that you really like and what their essential tones, like what doesn't change in their tone typically, and start there. I as a kid, what I used to do, I used to take my amp to different shops to try out pedals with, because I got tired of buying pedals, then driving home and then, this doesn't work at all. So, I would drive people nuts somewhat at shops, but I found all the pedals that I really liked that made that particular amp sound really great. And so it is a process of elimination. If you don't have the luxury of having a real amp though, then like with your computer plug-in stuff, even like with Amp Farm, very basic stuff, you figure out what ultimately what inspires you, what appeals to your ear. Everybody has a different ear. Everybody has a different part of frequencies that they like to hear and don't like to hear. And so I know for me, I'm more of a my regular amp is a 50s Tweed Deluxe, and it's a very basic amp. It has 3 controls on it. It has one tone control. It doesn't have separate bass or treble. It's just volume and tone basically. So right off the bat, I like the way the amp sounds just by itself. And so I know typically most of the time, if you really get an amp that sounds good plain, it's going to sound better with pedals typically. You just have to find the right pedals for that amp.
Yeah. I was going to say that when I'm doing these What Makes This Sound Great videos, if I don't have the amp, I usually will search for the amp and guitar combination that the people used, because I have enough different things. If I'm doing a Pink Floyd one, maybe use my Hi-Watt, or if I'm doing a Led Zeppelin, I'll pull out my Marshall. But I think that that the closer you can get with the amplifier, and then you augment it with the pedals to that sound, instead of buying something that is radically different. I was doing the Carry On Wayward Son. I was trying to get the guitar sound on it, and so I put my Marshall JMP 1971 up, and I was playing with a Strat. I thought Kerry Livgren played a Strat, but those guys played a lot of different guitars. He played a Dean. He played
335.
Played 335. So
SGs.
So I started playing with a Strat, and I was like, well, that's totally not the sound. That is not even close. It doesn't have the sustain. Doesn't have the meat that the notes need. It's obviously a humbucker sound.
Yeah.
You can tell from the distortion on the rhythm guitar and the da 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 da. So I immediately switched guitars to the whatever play. I think I played the SG. I played the SG, and as soon as I played that, I was like, okay, that works right there.
Yeah. No, that and that, like I said, that track was cut mainly with the 335. So it has if you listen to it, you can kind of hear it in the mid range. It has this hollowness to it that's really cool. And then when he multi-tracked it, it even enhanced it even more. So it was a great sound, So
I think the other thing that's important to realize here too with amps is you need to figure out what you like in terms of how an amp responds under your hands. because a Marshall style circuit feels completely different than a Fender style circuit.
Even if you're playing an Axe effects.
It's so you learn what fits your style. And the other thing to point out here that sometimes I think people lose in talking about gear and trying to figure out, Stevie Ray Vaughan played X, Y, and Z. It's like, I could go and pick up John Mayer's rig, literally walk on stage and pick up his rig, and I'm not going to sound like John Mayer. Yeah, we're close like that.
Okay, case in point, I worked with Trey Anastasio from Fish, and I used to get there early and play through his rig, and it sounded phenomenal. But I didn't sound anything like Trey.
Right.
Even though I listened to Trey play every day, and I knew the kind of licks he was playing and everything, it never even sounded close to him.
Yeah, because you're not Trey.
I'm not Trey.
Yeah, you're not Trey.
Trey's not you.
No,
and that's really where your voice. That's really where your voice is in your hands, and it's in what you've listened to and what you've come up on. And I think we all gravitate towards gear that gets the sound that's in our head out of the speakers.
Yeah, right.
And there's plenty of different pathways to do that, but I think again the best thing to do is you can watch all the YouTube videos in the world and you can look up Dave Gilmour was playing this high watt through these speakers and all this stuff, but you really have to eventually get your hands on the gear. For me, I was steered clear of Marshalls for a long time, and the reason was up until playing some of these here, I had never played through like a good Marshall.
Yeah.
When I was at school, they had a couple of those vintage modern Marshalls that I
forgot about those.
Couldn't stand. And so in my mind,
I think Marshall forgot about those too.
Well, but I hate to say it, I'll be devil's advocate. Beck used one for a while.
Beck used everything.
Yeah,
Dave.
and
he always sounds the same.
Yeah.
Well,
okay, so
it's hands. But yeah, no.
He always sounds the same.
Yeah, but he actually did use one for a little while.
Yeah. So you got to get into a position where you get your hands on the gear, and if that means buying and selling and trading stuff and living with it for a while to find your sound, I think that's Definitely. A good way to do that. But
I think experimenting too. It's like I love putting rigs together that don't make any sense, but then it sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, then that's half of the fun of it is trying to find stuff on your own thing, your own sound. It's like it's great if you want to sound like Brian May and go, that route and try to hunt that dog down. But it's just as important to find your sound too. And whether it means you're playing a Chinese Squire through a pig nose amp with all weird effects and stuff, if it works for you and inspires you, ultimately that's the sound you should hunt down and go for or go toward. I'm always I love this stuff. All of this stuff is great, but at the end of the day, I've put rigs together that really don't make any sense. One of the clean rigs I run a Trainer, early 80s Trainer Block 50 amp that is literally, it's this big, has an 8-inch speaker in it, and I found it at a pawn shop. It was like $75. I just needed something small that just cheap to take it to gigs where I didn't care. Well, lo and behold, I take it to gigs and I start realizing, man, this is a great actually sounded amp, And
so then you stopped taking it to gigs because you didn't want to get it ruined.
The thing about it is, so I took it to a bunch of gigs and I had a bunch of friends of mine go like, man, that sounds really great. I got to find one of those. Then all of a sudden on eBay, they went from like $100 to like $250. And there wasn't that many on there for sale, but I knew two guys that bought them. They were like, dude, I love that amp. It's a great amp. I'm like, yeah, and I just tripped over it. But to me, that's just as fun as, okay, save all your money up and buy a 100-watt high watt to be like Gilmour, It's because, like I said, whatever inspires you to play and play better and keep you interested and.
I was thinking about this when I was a kid. So my first guitar was a Les Paul, but really my second guitar was a Strat, and I remember on one of the Joe Perry, maybe Live in the Ruts or Live at the Ruts.
Oh no, that was record? Night in the Ruts.
Night in the Ruts.
Night in the Ruts. That wasn't a live record. You're talking about the bootleg '78 record.
Maybe it was a bootleg. It's a record where Joe Perry is playing a Les Paul and he has a Strat hanging on the back of his neck.
Yeah, that's live bootleg.
And I always thought that was unbelievable. That was so cool looking. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, you really need to have both.
Oh well, man, Rick Nielsen with 3.
Right, exactly.
He hit the 3, and then
at the House of Guitars they had that half Les Paul, half Strat, the double neck. That was amazing. It was always in there. They would never sell it, but
of course not. Yeah, no,
but to me, those two guitars were so radically different. But I was so intrigued by both sounds that I wanted to. I think that's kind of what led me into getting this guitar collection that I have, where I kind of have one of everything. I don't have. Well, I have 3 Les Pauls, but they're they're 3 different. They're three different.
They're
one's
all
a
different,
P90, one's a custom, and one's a standard.
Yeah, so it's so they're very different in sound.
Yeah.
They're different in construction. Obviously, the custom has an ebony fingerboard, and the other ones have rosewood, and then you have different pickups. But obviously, these things are important.
Yeah, I don't want to call anybody out, but I have never really understood the idea of somebody having like, oh, well, I'm a Strat guy, and they have like 6 Stratocasters. It's like, why not have 2 Strats, maybe one being like an HSS and a single coil, and then have a Tele, and then have a Les Paul, and then maybe like a 335. You're going to be able to do so much more, because at the end of the day, guitars and amps, these are tools, and they're tools to accomplish a job, right? And they're like a painter has different brushes that are different sizes and different materials to accomplish different things. I think I kind of look at guitars the same way. There's like different size chisels to do different things. So I just the idea of people being in one lane and I've got a collection of this many whatevers that are all kind of the same. It's like, man, I just don't think, to me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And especially when you look at even how different a Strat and a Tele are from one another.
Sure.
Even though on paper they're not that different, but tonally they're 2 completely different.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, somebody like John Mayer, he only really plays a Strat.
For a long time, that's what he did,
right? I mean, or his Silver Sky.
Yeah, but I mean, even his PRS is a Strat, right?
Yeah,
it's a Strat.
So I what I did early on for me was I had access to a lot of guitars through my dad at his shop, but ultimately what I ended up doing was having like a Strat and having 2 or 3 different pickguards that I used dip switch connectors with, so I could change out. I routed out the body, and I could change out from 2 humbucker to 3 humbucker to whatever. Well,
of course,
the thing
he did.
Well,
Dave.
Yeah, but the thing is it started with Eddie, man. I saw Eddie doing his thing, so I was like, okay, well, I want to start messing with my guitars too. All my favorite players, or most of them, he
ratted the stuff out and then didn't cover it.
Well, right, but I mean, most of my favorite players built their own guitars. It was like Brian May and all. So I started looking at that. I'm like, well, there's got to be something to that too. And what those guys, like what we're talking about, they were trying to find their sound, trying to find their thing.
All those players, Eric Johnson's, all the Stevie Ray, everybody had their own guitar and amp combination.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite things to talk about. One of my favorite topics. This guitar amp combination, because it's probably from being a producer for so many years, and when I didn't have a lot of things, I would have to try to get the sounds with the gear that I had. For example, when I made my 20 greatest guitar solo video, I did the Brian May. I did Bohemian Rhapsody, and I don't have a Brian May guitar. I have a Vox AC30, but Brian May's sound sounds like a half-cocked wah. It's very, very mid-rangey in 1K area, very nasally sound. So it took me a while. I had to use EQ and all this stuff, and I got the sound pretty dead on with it. But I didn't have the gear that he has.
Right.
So
you did.
But I recognized the tonal characteristics, so I was able to use other tools like EQs in Pro Tools to create the sound like his.
And you can do that, outside of Pro Tools as well. Things like EQ pedals.
Yeah.
Or, they're actually half-cocked wah pedals that are just a...
I got one right over there.
So it really is, we talk about this all the time, it's like the golden age of gear. You have so much access now to so many different tools to get unique sounds. I mean, you just go on Instagram and you look at what a lot of the younger Instagram guitar players, the sounds that they're getting out of their rigs, whether they be completely digital or analog, it's like there's some really, really fascinating new tones that I have never even thought of trying to go for, that people are coming up with now. And that's, I think, a direct response to the ease of access to all of these different effects and these amp modelers and software and basically anything that you can, how hard was it, like before the the Eventide, like the Space, or 10 years ago, 15 years ago, how hard was it to do like a shimmer reverb, for example? 20 years ago, how hard was it to do shimmer?
Well, Bob Clearmountain was doing them, but you had to be in recording studios to do that stuff. It was really difficult.
Right. Now every entry-level reverb pedal has a shimmer setting, and it's so accessible now that it's become cliche because so many people are using it. But the I guess the payoff to that is you're now open to doing crazy new things. It's also kind of the same thing, like the popularity of the modular synthesis is exploding right now, and there's a lot of crossover between guitar players getting into modular synthesis because it's kind of the same thing. You're patching effects together in unique combinations and routing signal together in unique combinations. It's really cool.
Yeah,
I think one of the things though that what I was talking about related to Brian May's sound is it's important to be able to recognize what you hear in a sound. Is it a mid-rangey sound? Is it a scooped sound? When I say scooped, meaning a lack of mid-range. Think of a graphic equalizer that has a dip in the middle. Does it have a low-end bump to it? Does it at 150 hertz? And being able to recognize these things, if you're being able to tell that Mark Knopfler's playing a Strat or things like that, recognizing these tonal characteristics of instruments, of amplifiers, things like that I think that's a skill that you can develop, and it's a great skill to have.
Yeah, it's like developing your ear for pitch. It's the same. It's very similar. A lot of the reasons why the top echelon great players, it's not that they're just great players. They know good tone, or they've figured out their sound. They've over years and years of cultivating, through it.
And a lot of that has to do with them recording records. And
yes, and I was going to say the best thing, if you really want to hone your tone, record yourself.
Yeah,
all the time. I can tell you right now, for me, I had a 4-track Fostex junky little 4-track cassette recorder for years, and I would record my tones, and I would sit there and go, yeah, that doesn't sound that great, or I can mess with the mics and stuff. That for me was leaps and bounds, because you train your ear. You figure out what frequencies are where and how it sits in a track and all that kind of thing. And I've had people for years, doing session stuff where people are like, how do you know what guitar to bring for this song or this and that? And do you just show up and it or what? I'm like, no. And I said most of the time when I did session work, I didn't even have my guitar with me. I was using stuff that was already at the studio, and so. But I would see a rack of guitars and I would listen to the song. I'm like, okay, well, I know this guitar will probably fit the best out of all of these. And it's doing your homework. It really, it's not just like well, you just punch a button and there it is. You got to do some legwork. You got to, like I said, record yourself. That's a great way to learn this stuff.
That's a great way to just get better as a musician in general. Because when you record yourself and you listen back, you can't hide. It highlights all of the shortcomings and the holes in your playing. I remember when I was at AIM, one of my teachers told me to do that. When you're even running scales or doing anything, sit and record yourself on your phone and listen back to it. And you would be surprised. It's like hearing your own voice on video for the first time. Yeah. People always say how they hate, I don't sound like that. Is that what I really sound like? It does the same thing when you track yourself and listen back, Yeah. But when it comes to the listening thing, I have a friend of mine, a lot of keyboard player friends of mine are incredibly good at being able to nail sounds. There's a buddy of mine here in Atlanta who's also named Rhett, but he is an incredible keys player, one of the best synth players I know, and he can sit and listen to almost any synth sound and instantly tell you what it is and how to dial it up on any kind of synth. Oh, it's this wave and this octave, and they're doing this with the envelope. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah, I can tell you, I spent just as much time figuring out tones as I did practicing.
Yeah.
We'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Put it in the comments below. Follow Dave on Instagram at
Dojo Guitar Repair.
Follow Rhett on Rhett Shull at Rhett Shull on Instagram and YouTube. Follow me on Instagram, RickBeato1, and obviously, if you haven't subscribed, don't just subscribe like to mine or Rhett's channel. Ring the bell. Thanks for watching.